In Deltarune Chapter 4, right at the end, we are hit with one of the darkest scenes in the story so far. It's an important character moment for Ralsei, and in this video, I'm going to analyze it. This video will fully spoil all of Deltarune and is intended for those who have already played the game, so let's begin. All throughout the chapters, Ralsei is quick to dehumanize himself. He sees himself as less than the Lightners as he is a Darkener, and so let's dive into that. So what I'd say the defining difference between a Lightner and a Darkener, other than the realms they inhabit, is that Darkeners have a set purpose placed upon them. And we see that this purpose not only informs how they act and appear, but also causes most of the conflict that they go through. For example, Tenna. He is a Darkener who manifested from a TV, and so his purpose is to be watched. And when people no longer watch him, he is no longer able to fulfill his purpose, resulting in him accepting the offer of the night and kicking off the conflict in Chapter 3. Another interesting example is Queen, who is a laptop, and she derives her power and purpose from Lightners using the internet. She basically behaves like a recommendation algorithm, trying to do what she thinks Noelle wants, and she thinks that Noelle and other Lightners would be happier if she was a supreme leader. So she is just a little bit dumb, and she doesn't realize that working with the Knight would doom both her and the Lightners, until Ralsei tells her that. In both of these examples, the Darkeners clearly knew what their purpose is, and it was something that they could achieve, at least for a time. I think it's obviously wrong to label either Tenna or Queen as fully evil, as they were both just trying to fulfill their purpose. That'd be like labeling a shark evil for eating fish, or a fandom member as evil for poorly overlaying images of their favorite characters on old-ass vines. It's just in their nature. So what about Ralsei? What's his purpose? Well, it's to sit and wait. His title is literally the Lonely Prince. His job is to fulfill the prophecy, and over the course of this video, I'm going to be analyzing what this role entails and what Ralsei believes his purpose to be. Ralsei directly talks about his self-dehumanization, referring to himself as a tool whose purpose is to be used by Lightners. But we can also continually see this through the game in imagery and other things. For example, there's the reoccurring joke of him acting as a stool for Chris to stand on. He turns into a horse in Chapter 3 for them to ride. He also becomes a block and a bridge for the players who literally push around and step on. Sure, these are not completely serious scenes, but they all follow the obvious trend of Ralsei being an object for others to use. Another clever way that Deltarune conveys this is how it uses classic RPG tropes. Throughout the game, Ralsei always follows Chris around and listens to their battle commands, while Susie often rebels against this, especially in the first chapter. But throughout it all, Ralsei is all too willing to be a follower. And in Chapter 3, this is shown pretty clearly through the Zelda game sections, where Susie is constantly running around the screen and acting a lot how most people would play games with their friends, or Ralsei obediently follows Chris around like usual. This is probably my favorite bit of characterization in Chapter 3, is it's really unique. I don't think I've ever seen another game try to recreate the behavior of split-screen games in a single-player game like this. But overall, by sticking closely to RPG and video game tropes, Ralsei contrasts with the rest of Deltarune, which is much less paint by numbers whenever it comes to mechanics. And it further characterizes Ralsei as a rule follower. So, moving on from analysis of earlier scenes for Ralsei, it's time to focus on what I think are the two darkest moments for Ralsei. These are just about as serious as Deltarune gets, and the first one is the fight between Susie and Ralsei after the fake Gerson is defeated. And when I say darkest, I don't mean like most violent or scary or anything. I mostly just mean most important and most serious. But this first scene puts special focus on Susie's mounting anger against Ralsei. And I think it's interesting that this anger likely paralleled the player's suspicion and distrust towards Ralsei. As we keep learning more and more secrets that he's kept, Susie also experiences these revelations, and she hates being treated like she has to be babied and protected. So it makes sense that she's the one to blow up at Ralsei. But what we learn next really ties together some of the underlying themes that I've discussed so far in this video. Ralsei knows too many things that he never asked to know, and this hurts him. But he wants to be the one who can bear this pain. What is Ralsei's purpose as a Darkener? How does he serve the Lightners? While he might have a role in the prophecy and in the group of heroes, it's not as cut and dry for him as it is for someone like Tenna. So he looked at the knowledge that he was cursed with, and he looked at the friends who he is prophesied to meet. And he decided that his purpose must lie in the pain that he feels. It tears him apart to keep these secrets, but it would be even worse if he had to impose upon his friends the same fear and dread that he feels constantly towards the future. So he bottles it up and puts on a smile. And so when Susie questions this, it's all he can do to apologize over and over. He failed at his purpose, to keep his friends safe from the truth, but also to guide them. And so, with some support from Susie, he promises not to keep secrets from them anymore. Ralsei is recognizing that his purpose of being a friend to the heroes doesn't just mean keeping them happy for the time being, but despite this revelation, he still wants to hide the darkest secret from them. So I think this leads us to the main takeaway that Toby Fox wants us to get from Ralsei's character, and maybe from Deltarune as a whole. It is dehumanizing to be prescribed a purpose, to know your fate. Susie has been put in a box her whole life. Berkeley suffers from the expectation that he's built around being smart. Chris is literally puppeted by the player, and every Darkner has been given a purpose that makes them subservient to the light nerds. And while they may temporarily find some fulfillment in their prescribed purpose, it's still crushing, especially as it's usually impossible for them to be able to always fulfill their purpose. Eventually they'll fail to fulfill it, and then what? I believe that the key thing that every character in Deltarune is working towards is freedom. And for Ralsei, his arc will eventually coalesce in him realizing that he wants to seek out freedom for himself. And I think this is backed up by the final scene. After defeating the Titan, Susie stumbles upon the end of the prophecy and the horrible consequences that it foretells for the group. And just like before, Ralsei's first instinct is just to keep apologizing. Even with his new, amended purpose, he failed. Susie found out the terrible truth, and now she too has to shoulder that pain. But in his worst case scenario, what Ralsei didn't expect is for Susie to take it so well. She promises to break through fate and laughs it all off. Susie could definitely be masking her true fear, similar to how Ralsei acts, but she has also repeatedly denied fate in the past. So I believe that her hope is genuine. It's also striking how, instead of dwelling on this prophesized future, Susie takes it all one step at a time. They might not be able to control their destiny, but they can seal this fountain. They can do the right thing right now. Ralsei didn't expect Susie to take it so well, and so it seems that he began to reconsider his purpose once again. Maybe his friends are tougher than he thought. Maybe his role isn't as isolating and lonely as he once believed. And though he tries once again to put on a facade of happiness and hope, despite his worst fears being confirmed, despite the prophecy not changing, Chris is quick to let him know that it's alright not to smile. Well, at least that seems to be the choice that the player is expected to make, as the other one is just cruel. So finally, Ralsei vocalizes some of the things that I've been inferring about purpose and friendship. Maybe friendship is more complicated than he thought. Maybe things can change. He always hoped that the prophecy could change, but it was a distant hope. However, maybe with the help of Susie, he can start to truly believe that it doesn't have to end in tragedy. He wants the freedom to hope like Susie, the freedom from his destiny. So what really is Ralsei's purpose? Sure, he's got a role in the prophecy as the Dark Prince, and a role in the team as the healer. But a purpose? Well, that's for him to decide. And I think that he's finally beginning to realize that by the end of Chapter 4. Deltarune's focus on prophecies is far from a unique trait among stories. Undertale even shares a very similar prophecy, even if it isn't as prominent. So I just want to take a bit of time to look at prophecies in other media, and how Deltarune both draws influence from other prophecies and contrasts starkly with them. Maybe one of the most famous prophecies in the history of stories, at least in the West, is found in the story of Oedipus Rex. You probably know the story, but basically Oedipus is prophesied to kill his father and sleep with his mother. He vows that he'll never do that, accidentally does it, and then gouges his eyes out. Oedipus is a tragic hero, one who tries to run from his prophecy, but in the process he simply fulfills it. And this very famous trope can be compared to Ralsei's behavior in Deltarune. Ralsei tries his absolute best to do what he considers the right things, to work as hard as he can to prevent the sacrifice near the end of the prophecy from coming true, but nothing has changed. It's still foretold. But what is probably even more common than the hero trying and failing to escape a prophecy is a villain doing horrible things in order to avoid a prophecy coming true for them. 99% of the time, it seems like this prophecy is that a villain's son will defeat him, so he tries his best to kill his son, which ultimately gives his son a reason and usually a way to kill him. It seems that the common consensus among ancient and most modern writers is that running from your fate is useless, and even knowing your fate has the ability to turn even the best of men into cowardly murderers who will do anything to avoid it. And overall, Deltarune seems to agree that prophecies kinda suck. While the religion of Deltarune is mostly portrayed in a positive light, and the prophecy it follows seems to bring real hope to its followers, they are also very disconnected from it. The followers have no idea when this prophecy will be fulfilled, so they imagine being involved in it is a fun little fantasy, not realizing that it is directly impacting people in their very town. For Chris, Susie, and Ralsei, their future actions are spelled out, and while this is sort of comforting to know that their lives seem to be protected by some sort of grand narrative, it's a lot scarier whenever the prophecy foretells doom. Ultimately, I think that Deltarune is showing that knowing one's fate is toxic, or Ralsei being the prime example of how this can affect someone. However, I think that it's also worth looking at this from a more meta perspective. The story of Deltarune literally has been written. In the narrative, there's a prophecy, but outside of that narrative, there is Toby Fox and the other writers who are working on the game, who have outlined the fates of these characters. So I can't help but wonder if he planned for Deltarune to be released in chapters in order to coincide with this, and for us as the audience to worry about the fate of the characters alongside the characters. It's an incredibly interesting and engaging way to release a game. And though it might just be out of necessity, I won't be surprised if the narrative Deltarune doesn't eventually acknowledge how it's being released in chapters and future chapters. But there is one thing that I haven't looked at so far. During the Snowgrave route, this final scene that I've talked so much about changes. Rather than having hope for a better future than the one prophesied, Ralsei fears that it can be changed, but it could be for the worse. Sure, knowing that something bad will happen is bad, but fearing something worse, now that's horrifying. It definitely seems that the presence of Noelle could throw a wrench to the prophecy, with her breaking the rules of Deltarune through her ice powers and through the player's actions. I think it's also interesting and sad how, after stating this, Ralsei almost asks Chris something, but then he hesitates and decides not to finish. The player's actions throughout the route seem to be directly damaging his character arc, with Ralsei no longer fully able to trust Chris. He wants to tell him something, but then he pushed it back down. He can't fulfill his promise to Susie of being fully truthful if he can't trust that Chris isn't aiming to bring them down the even darker path that he fears. In conclusion, through these two scenes, we finally can piece together what really drives Ralsei throughout the story. Beyond simply wanting to be with his friends and save the world, Ralsei has had an immense weight placed upon his back, and he's only made it worse by isolating and dehumanizing himself. Ultimately, this hesitation to share his pain with other heroes could bring about the very sacrifice of which he fears. However, I have faith that Susie and Chris will do anything they can to help Ralsei and to save the world and avoid the sacrifice. So let's hope that giving everything ends up being enough. Thanks for watching. As a quick note, I like how the previous video turned out, but it was a bit rushed. Honestly, I overall do disagree that it is just a plot recap like some people are saying. I don't know, I talked a lot about different scenes that stood out to me, and I tried to refrain from simply restating things that happened. It's fine if people don't like this sort of video, but I just don't really see where they're coming from. However, I do admit that my analysis wasn't as deep as some of the other ones I've done in the past. I do find it a bit hard to confidently analyze an incomplete story. In this new video, I definitely made some more leaps of logic that I originally didn't, and also I've just thought about the game more. Looking back, I definitely wish that this was part of the original video, but I can't go back and change it, so this is the second best thing. Nevertheless, I am striving to reflect on feedback and improve my content moving forwards. The next video won't be about Deltarune, but it'll be pretty soon. I'm focusing on this video essay channel right now as I have a lot of ideas for videos I'd like to release this summer, so please subscribe for those. And by the way, check out my full Deltarune analysis if you haven't seen it yet. But that's all. Bye.